Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live stream where we have the opportunity to feature one of our speakers for the World Nutrition Summit 2025 with you. I just quickly want to apologize if you hear any screaming kids in the background. They are mine. I'm not sure what those wildlings are up to right now, but they will be okay. But yeah, I am incredibly excited to have Craig Emmerich here with me today. He is a best-selling author, a long-time practitioner, and someone who has helped thousands of people around the world to reclaim their health. And today's Q&A is just a sneak peek into what you can expect from him at the summit. So, Craig, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this event.
Yes, it's absolutely going to be incredible to be able to meet you and your wife, Maria, and so many other key players in this low-carb, ketogenic, and I want to say carnivore at nutrition and health movement. Some of you, really, I want to say I'm a big fan of yours. And a lot of you guys that will be joining us feels a little bit like celebrities to me. So I'm really excited.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so everyone, please, comment section, say hi, tell us where you're from, let us know if you'll be joining for the summit. We would love to have you here in Cape Town, but if you cannot make it, you're also welcome to join us virtually. And Craig's title for his is Understanding Insulin and Ketones. And we're just going to talk a little bit about that more today. But Craig, before we start, I would like to ask you, what are you most looking forward to about the summit?
I'm looking forward to just meeting all the different speakers and hearing all the different topics that are going to be covered. That's one of my favorite things, that is learning something new. And I think, one that, I have a background in electrical engineering, and that one of the things about electrical engineering is you got to keep up on the science. And if you don't keep up on the latest science and what's going on, in 6 months, you're obsolete. And so I've kind of brought that same mentality into this space. And Marie and I have always been learning and adapting and adjusting to the new science and new information that's coming out. And that's why I love, hearing other speakers and what they're covering.
That's amazing. So your topic, insulin and ketones, it can sound a little bit technical to some people. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more why this topic is so important.
Yeah, I think it's really important because, especially on the insulin side, everybody looks at insulin as this storage hormone, and it is. It does. One of the primary roles is to store fuels into glucose and fatty acids into storage. But there's so much more, and that's what I want to get into in this discussion, is some of the nuances of what insulin really does. And it's as much of a sort of a thermostat, if you will, like for your home. In your home, you want a temperature of 74 degrees. And if it gets above that, it's going to cool it down back to 74. If it gets below that, it's going to pull it back up to 74. It's like it's keeping it at this point that it wants to be at. And the pancreas is really a lot like that, in that it's regulating the fuel supply in your bloodstream based on demand, based on all these factors. And if it goes up too high, it's going to pull it down and store off those excess fuels that for example. And then there's other situations where it might dip. Insulin will dip to allow more fuel into the bloodstream. And for example, I like the fat cells as insulin is as much of a net around those fat cells to hold back fuel from flooding into the bloodstream as it is a storage hormone. So it kind of has a little bit different functions than just being a storage hormone.
Yeah. Thank you. That is so interesting, because often, especially in the field of diabetes, metabolic health, we often think of insulin as the villain, and
Yeah.
we don't want we don't want high end, but it's actually like you explained how it's got such an important role.
Yeah.
My question to you now, just from what you've mentioned, is there something like too low insulin in a healthy individual to the point where, let's say, you completely cut out all carbs, your blood sugar, is very much regulated? Like, is there a case where you can have too low insulin?
Not in a healthy working pancreas. Okay. And that thing too, like insulin's the villain. It's not necessarily the villain in that it's just trying to do its job, right? Its job is to keep the fuel in the bloodstream in a tight range where it needs to be at that time. And what happens is somebody with insulin resistance, and I talk about this as well. This is not a topic we had covered for this, but I'll just mention it. Is there's something called a personal fat threshold, where your body only has fat cells and they can only get so full. And if they get too full, if they kept putting fat in, they burst. They can't get any bigger. So they say no more fat in me. They reject insulin. That's the start of insulin resistance. And if too many of your fat cells are stuffed, then the fat in your bloodstream can't get into storage. So insulin wants it to go into storage, but the fat cells are saying no. So insulin goes more to try to drive it into storage. And you have high triglycerides, which is insulin resistance, right? That's what very common. You always see these high triglyceride levels in people with and high glucose in people with insulin resistance. And so insulin in that role isn't the enemy. It's the thing trying to fix the problem. It's trying to drive the fat back down in the bloodstream and glucose. So it keeps going higher and higher and higher to try to force fuel out of the blood because it doesn't like it that high. It's not good for the body. Too high of glucose can kill you. And so it's really kind of doing its job. And so it's kind of like the firefighter showing up to fix the problem. He's not the problem. It's the fire.
Wow, that's so interesting. And I just quickly want to go over to the comments because I see Karen is saying hi all the way from Durban here in South Africa. She says she's a big fan of yours.
Oh,
and then I see Mandisa from Westwell, KwaZulu-Natal, excited to be here. And then Karen is commenting and saying, insulin is clearly very underrated. And I agree.
definitely.
And then Teresa is just saying, Karen, 100% agree. So we don't want to give everything away right now, right? So we'll save some of it for the summit. But I would love to ask you a little bit about ketones. Like maybe just for anyone that might not know, you can maybe just first explain to us what is a ketone and how does our bodies make them?
Ketone bodies are these things the body makes from fat. And some people mistakenly believe that when you're eating keto or very low carb or carnivore, your primary fuel for the body is ketones, but it's not. It's actually the fat itself. And so fat gets pulled out of your fat cells and directly used in your muscle as fuel or in your different tissues. Some of the fat goes to the liver and gets turned into ketones, which can then fuel parts of the brain that run on ketones, like parts of the body, like the brain, that prefer to run on ketones. So it fuels specific parts of the body more than others. But what's interesting about it is some people in the keto or low carb space will try to get those higher. And that's not necessarily the goal that you want to shoot for. And I talk a lot about that in this presentation as well.
Wow, that's so interesting because now I want to ask why, but maybe we shall keep that for October.
Yeah.
But I've got another question. So can ketones and insulin coexist?
So no, they're very counter to each other in that when insulin goes up, ketones generally go down. And so that's why when you eat higher carbohydrates, your ketone levels are typically quite low. And but a lot of it's a sort of, and this could really get into the chemistry here, and I'll save that. But there's another little interesting quirk in that there's a compound made from glucose that drives the citric acid cycle for burning fat as fuel, that if glucose gets too low in the liver, meaning, for example, you're eating zero carb or very low carb, there's the process of pushing out more ketones is because you're running out of glucose to fuel because there's I'll leave it again for the presentation, but there's a compound that made from glucose that is used to burn fat directly in the liver. And this compound gets low when glucose is low. And so the body has to force to produce more ketones because it can't burn the fat directly in the liver.
That's so interesting. And in a case of, let's say someone has high insulin and they supplement with exogenous ketones, would the body be able to use those ketones?
Yes. Yeah. Well, the body, so ketones are kind of a unique fuel in that other fat, glucose, they kind of get just stored off when there's excess. Ketones, if there's excess, will be excreted through the urine or through the breath. And so when you take exogenous ketone product, the body's going to use that as fuel. And if there's any excess, it'll just be excreted. So it's a little different in that, like if you take an excess amount of glucose, the excess is going to get stored and fat. Yeah. But so it's a little bit different in that way. Yeah.
But would your body then, let's say you have high insulin and you are following a traditional SAD diet.
Yeah.
Would your body then, if you take exogenous ketones, would your body then first use up the glucose and then the ketones, or the ketones and then the glucose? How do they interplay?
So that's something called oxidative priority. And I do touch on that in this presentation too. It's not a full in-depth, but yeah, there's a priority that the body uses for different fuels. Actually, the very first priority is alcohol, because alcohol can be used as a fuel, but there's zero storage for alcohol. So the body has to burn that first because it can't store it anywhere. So, and really high alcohol in the blood is a problem. You could even die. So the body gets a little bit into panic mode where, and my puppy, I guess, wants to say hi, but the body's a little panic mode because alcohol, it can't put it anywhere. So it's like, okay, let's burn this. Mm-hmm. But that means any of the carbs, fat, exogenous ketones that you took, well, not ketones because they don't get stored, but fat and carbs you ate while drinking the alcohol, that gets stored off because it's got to burn the alcohol. So there's definitely an oxidative priority in the body. Yeah.
Okay. That is so interesting because I don't think people always consider that or think about that. I think especially when it's, the marketing of exogenous ketones, often for different type of health benefits. And yeah.
For me,
I see we've got a question. Sorry, go ahead.
We only use them for specific situations. They're not good for weight loss because it's another fuel that you're loading onto the body. They are really good for certain conditions like Alzheimer's, seizures, things where elevated ketones are helpful for the brain.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I see we've got a question here from Daniel. Most physicians typically request fasting glucose and HbA1c when ordering work. I've been asking my primary care provider to include fasting insulin as well, given its value in assessing early insulin resistance. Could you provide your perspective on how to interpret these markers, especially the interplay between fasting insulin and fasting glucose?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good question. Very good point. We always are asking clients to get fasting insulin done as well as fasting glucose. It gives you a much better picture of what's going on. I actually have several slides on this in the presentation as well, but there's something called HOMA-IR, which is a calculation that's made from fasting insulin and fasting glucose. Mm-hmm. And it basically is a gauge of your level of insulin resistance. And that's the kind of detail you get by doing both. Because here's an example. Let's say you have a fasting glucose of 85 milligrams per deciliter. That's a completely normal in US units. That's a completely normal blood glucose. So the doctor would normally say, oh, you're fine. No insulin resistance, fasting glucose is fine. But then if you check their insulin, fasting insulin, it might be 20, which is super high. So the pancreas is working really, really, really hard to keep that glucose in the normal range. So you're basically pre-diabetic, but you don't see it in the glucose level. So it's very important.
And I see Karen is actually now asking as well, what are the ranges for healthy insulin?
Typically, we try to get people in the like 6 or less range. And yeah, I don't really see a situation where there's too low of insulin. I mean, I don't know, a working pancreas. We have clients, that have fasting insulin of 2. They are doing great, thriving.
So interesting. I'm not sure. I suspect our measurements might be a little bit different. But
Yeah.
I actually within the past 6 months, also got my insulin tested for the first time ever because physician tested, the doctors don't put it on the list. So I went to my doctor and I said, please, I would like to get the following things tested, and ticked all the boxes. And my insulin reading came back lower as the normal range that they indicated. And that's also why earlier I found your answer interesting and around, is there something about like too low insulin?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think there is. No, again, in a working, if you're type 1 diabetic or LADA or in one of these, late onset, where your pancreas isn't putting out enough insulin anymore, you'll see in the other markers, your glucose will be starting to go too high and your fatty acids too high, your triglycerides, you'll see it there.
Sorry, you broke up there for a moment.
Sorry.
But it's fine. I think it might be on my side. But I see we've got another very interesting question from Oswald. He said, I may have missed the question, but should everyone aim to be in a state of nutritional ketosis in general?
So here's a couple things about that. And that's why I'm touching on ketones in this presentation, is in some groups, they do focus on ketone levels and trying to get them to a certain level. And the first question is, is there any correlation between elevated blood ketones and weight loss? If weight loss is your goal, and there's not, you can have very high blood ketone levels and weight. So the question then becomes, why are you looking to get the ketone levels to a certain point? And then there's also a question of, or a thing that happens. Typically, the process coming from a standard diet to a ketogenic type diet, you're going to initially see blood ketones go up quite a bit because the body doesn't have the glucose it needs, and it's pushing out more ketones as a result. But as you get more keto adapted, if you will, as your body starts to learn how to burn fat efficiently as a fuel, your blood ketones come down. Mm-hmm. And actually over a year, 2 years, they float to maybe a 0.3 to 0.5 range, which is completely normal and completely fine. But a lot of people that there's, again, the range of ketone that people refer to of, say, greater than 0.5, there's nothing that really is a foundation for having that level, right? There's nothing that says, okay, at 0.4, you're not in ketosis, but in 0.5 you are. It's not, it's kind of an arbitrary number. Even at 0.3, you're probably 5 or 10 times the ketone levels of somebody eating a standard diet, right? So that's totally fine. But I'll go into much of why that is in the presentation.
I mean, I can totally relate. I remember when my husband and I started following a ketogenic diet, way back then, we were very much kind of thinking about ketones and it has to be high. Very much that mindset you mentioned now about thinking you are only in ketosis when your ketone levels are at a certain point. So yeah. I think it's very good for people to know and understand that is not necessarily, an indication. And there's other things to take into consideration when you follow a ketogenic diet. But speaking of diets, you yourself, you follow a carnivore diet or
Yeah.
lifestyle, shall I rather say.
Yeah. So a little different. It seems like in some communities it's kind of siloed, like either you're keto or you're carnivore or you're low carb.
Yeah.
We just look at it as a spectrum that we adjust based on the person's goals, right? Um, we look at carnivore primarily as a like autoimmune protocol, or people that they went keto and things got better, but not maybe to want them to be from their health standpoint or whatever. Maybe carnivore is the next level to get them over the hump, and you know and like I mentioned, we in our book, carnivore book, it's up here somewhere. We have a carnivore autoimmune protocol in there defined that works really well for autoimmune diseases, for people with bipolar or different brain conditions. It basically strips you down to just beef to be at the beginning, and then builds back up different animal proteins, different eggs, different things, to see how the body reacts and see what you can tolerate. And that works really well for a lot of people that keto didn't quite where they want it to be.
Do you want to share a little bit about why you decided to start following a carnivore lifestyle?
Yeah, so this was, I don't know, 8 years ago, 9 years ago. Initially, my wife started eating low carb keto 25 years ago. And we've been helping people with this lifestyle, clients, for over 20 years. So we've been in this for a long time. About 20 years ago, I started eating keto. I came around. Took me a little longer. I got a German background, and I like to brew my own beer and do different things. So, but I just started to realize how good I was when I just ate her food, and I just decided I want to be feel that way all the time. But so I was doing great. She had all these health concerns, IBS, PCOS. That's why that motivated her to change. At that time, I didn't have any health issues. I ended up losing about 15, 20 pounds, which was great, but it wasn't a big urgency for me at the time. So it took a little bit more for me to, but I didn't have any health issues. And then suddenly 15 years ago, I think it is 13, 14 years ago, I started having this pain in my back moving up into my shoulders, neck. And at first I thought it was just this old football injury I had from high school in my lower back, but just kept up into my neck, getting really stiff. And so eventually I finally started trying to figure out what is going on here, because my mobility started going down. And all the normal tests were nothing. Finally, even the standard Western blot Lyme disease test showed nothing. Then I got a better test for Lyme disease, and it showed I was positive. Because to me, it sounded like Lyme disease. So finally figured out that's what it was. Been treating, and right then at that time, like 7, 8 years ago, I switched to carnivore to help with my pain, and it did help a lot. So, and this was before most people even knew about the carnivore diet. And I just knew that when I started eliminating more plants, my pain would go down a bit and be more under control. So I've kept eating that way ever since, and it does help with my pain generally.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. And I think one of the reasons why that happens, correct me if I'm wrong, is because it helps reduce the inflammation in your body. And some people react differently to plant foods than others.
Yeah. So, all plants have something called anti-nutrients. These are compounds that the body does not use. So the body has to detox them and get rid of them. Well, if you're in this, state where you're inflamed and you've got, the body's already fighting the Lyme disease and trying to detox and get rid of all of that, and then you add a load of additional things to detox, it's just going to make the whole system, more of a drag on it and cause problems and inflammation. Where if you just stick to animal proteins don't have any anti-nutrients. And so, it's just, I think that's the big factor that helps it out.
Definitely. I see we've got another question. So I think before we end off the session, let's just quickly have a look at that. It's from Lisa. She's saying, "Hi, Craig and Jana. This session has been super informative and I'm learning a lot. Thanks for sharing your expertise. I was wondering, how can I test my ketone levels at home and what is the most accurate method?"
So I'll address the question first, and then I'll say why you should. So the most accurate is going to be a blood test, finger prick, just like diabetics do for their glucose, and that'll give you a blood ketone level at that given time. There's other ones like breath and urine. Urine is the least accurate. It shows in the beginning because you're dumping ketones because you're not using them for fuel. As you get more keto adapted and your body starts actually using the ketones, that's in the urine, so it'll drop way off. But at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, unless you're dealing with Alzheimer's, dementia, unless you're dealing with seizures, brain condition where elevated ketones will help that condition, there's no reason to worry about what the blood ketone levels are. If you just, instead of spending the money and the finger pricks and the time worrying about blood ketones, worry about getting your macros, worry about keeping carbs as low as you can, getting enough protein, worry about those things, and everything else will take care of itself, no matter what the blood ketone levels are.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me personally, the easiest way I know that I'm in ketosis is literally, I feel one of the biggest thing for me is mental clarity.
Yeah. It's sustained energy all day, no dip in energy in the afternoon or anything.
Yeah. And then I want to say other people look at you funny when you tell them you only eat once a day. Oh, I had 6 egg breakfast and I'm only having dinner again. It's just the benefits and just how you feel is absolutely.
Cravings go down, hunger goes down, all that.
Exactly. So thank you, Craig, so much. But before we end off, I have one last question for you. So at the summit, we are going to have some, I think, I won't say difficult conversations, but we're definitely going to have some conversation that has not spoken out about before. And especially when it comes to health and nutrition and I would say America's guideline, global nutritional guidelines, do you think we are at a tipping point where they are starting to change?
I hope so. I know the one thing I know is, I was an electrical engineer, but then I moved into product management. And as a product manager, you're kind of like the CEO of a product. And, I moved into healthcare. I was in first some medical informatics systems, and then also in imaging systems like PET scan, CT scan software for that. And the one thing I know for certain is that healthcare moves at a glacial pace. I mean, getting any change to permeate through our system is, guidelines and standard of care and all that. It's moves at a glacial pace. So while I'm hopeful, it will definitely still take time, I'm sure, even if big changes do happen.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get a few skeptics to come to this summit as well, so we can show them the evidence. Thank you so much, Craig, for this conversation. Personally, I've got so many questions for you, so I'll keep them from it. And I can just tell from the questions in the comment section, this is very much a topic that needs to be addressed and that needs to be discussed and to be better understood. Thank you so much for being here with us. And audience members, thank you for joining. And please, if you have not had a chance to look at our website or look at our incredible lineup of speakers, I see our media team has been posting everything in the comment section. Go grab your ticket. I would love to meet all of you. There's only limited tickets available. And we really hope to see you there. Again, Craig,
thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.